Francis, thank you so much for joining us. I am calling you or video chatting you from my bedroom. And so before we really dive in, I have to ask you, at what point did you know that this is how we would be working for the long haul? What was that moment for you?
For me, it got super real when my wife, Anne, got COVID, and she got it pretty early, and she had it for a long time, a little over 3 months. And so it hit our family hard, and I could tell it changed everything about all of our dynamics from them. We were in quarantine and all of that. So I early on realized that this was going to be a big thing. I think just out of the luck of the draw of having been personally affected early.
How is she doing now?
Thank you for asking. Fully recovered. But when you're in the midst of it, you don't know that you're going to get when you're going to recover, and you don't know that you're going to fully recover. And that brings a level of anxiety that I think that's one of the things that everybody is dealing with right now is the uncertainty.
So how has this backdrop changed the way that you personally work?
Oh, goodness. It's changed everything about it. First, it's like totally blurry. I don't know if that's what it is for you, but I have a super hard time knowing what day of the week it is, knowing what time of day it is. So everything has become blurred. There's punctuation for for meals with our children, like that. Those seem to be the ritualistic things. I'm in my office, which is now an all-in-one. I can do anything in here. I can teach from the blackboard. I can be on Zoom. I can do anything. I have a couch out of where I can take a nap. So it changes it's like I have a mobile camper, but it just happens to be my office at home. And it's a 24/7 shot. I could be working at any time because I now can reach people on the other side of the world. So I'm like, oh, let's make it convenient for you. So I'll wake up at 2 a.m. And so it's very surreal. There's some sides to it that are just amazing. And then there are some sides to it that are super weary.
So let's talk about that. How can we make sure that we are working better right now and not just getting by? I think that's something that what you're saying really resonates with me.
Yeah. So I think that because right now we're working in a pandemic and remotely. I think in the future we're going to be working a lot more remotely, hopefully a lot less in a pandemic. So that persistent level of anxiety, I think that part, which is, I hope, temporary, that's, I think, the most important part to address right now. In the best of times, when we were working, we would try to be good at as many things as possible. It's like the number one advice that I have for people is pick a couple of things that you're going to be great at and really let the others go. So for me, it's family and work. But I am not as good a daughter right now. I used to call my mother, every week. Sorry, Mom. I'm not as good of a sister. I haven't been to a PTA meeting in a year. So I'm purposefully letting a bunch of things go so that I can concentrate on a couple of things. I think we need to give each other that gift. Anne and I would refer to it as dare to be bad. But it's bad in the service of great. It used to lead to exhausted mediocrity if you tried to be great at too many things. Now I fear it's worse than exhaustion, and it's worse than mediocrity. So I really think that persistent anxiety means we got to pick just a couple things to be good at, and then the rest of them we have to have a lot of grace and forgiveness for ourselves.
So how do you decide which things that you're going to be bad at? Right.
That's such a good question.
Especially when you think about work, right? So you're talking about these different aspects of your life.
Yeah.
Within your own job. I'm sure there are things that you also decide to let go. How does one do that?
It's exactly the right question. So the first is decide what you're going to be great at and reverse engineer what you have to be bad at. So don't have a meeting on what should I be bad at? It's depressing, and the people who self-select to attend, you don't want to hang out with. But what do I like? What does the team need from me in this week, in this day, in this month? What can I do even more of? And then what does that mean I have to give up? And I recommend having those conversations. If you say where do you need like the best version of me. We refer to it as like, you can think about super you, average you, and bummer you. And where do you want super you to show up? And I would have that conversation with the people you work with. Where do you need like us to really kill it? And then let's reverse engineer what we can give up in order to sustain that.
That's really interesting. Okay, so when you think about what this is going to do to workplaces and this idea of culture of work, how can you create a culture when we are operating this way?
Yeah, so I think we need to build resilience into our cultures like never before. I think cultures were like good cultures or bad cultures, but resilience hasn't always been the thing. But I think now we have to build in resilient cultures, because if it's not a pandemic, it's going to be something. We want to be prepared for it. So if you think about like, what do you need in a resilient culture? It means that some things are going to go wrong. So you have to be able to bounce back. To us, that means you have to build a culture that's built on trust. Because if we have a reservoir of trust, you're going to get the benefit of that without doubt. If we have to bounce back, if somebody has a bad day, if something goes wrong, we're like locked arms and we can come back for it. So I would think about culture with resilience and trust. And I think you can design both of those pretty purposefully.
So I know you talk a lot about trust. How is that harder to do right now? And what are some of the lessons and tips that you recommend?
Well, so, building trust over Zoom versus in person. So a big part of trust is empathy. And so if I'm in a room with you, like I'm making eye contact, the chair I sit in could be right next to you. I could get up and get you a cup of coffee. So I have all these micro actions I can do to reveal empathy. And on Zoom, it's only my words. So on Zoom, I might ask, how are you doing? And you're going to say, fine. Or if you say fine, I can't stop there. Because if we were in the same room, we could pick up on all of the other cues. So I have to find some way to engage you. So how are you doing? And you say, I'm doing fine. And I'm like, it sounds like the schools in Cambridge are never opening again. How's that working out for your family? Like, I just have to do something to get you to engage so I can see all the micro signals, so I can know where the empathy. So we have to do some prodding, I guess some sanding, so we can see the stuff that we would normally see in a physical environment.
So you've been working in leadership for a long time. I'm curious to know, what lessons have you learned in the past month that have just sort of been thrown out the window for you? Maybe old learnings that you just took to no longer hold.
Yeah. So the way we think about leadership, we would always say leadership is about making others better as a result of your presence and having it last into your absence. Out the window. Absence does not come after presence. Absence comes before presence, and sometimes. So that you get the benefit of presence before the absence. And so you can do all these things in the presence, gone. So that's one thing that we now have to prepare people for our presence and absence, maybe our absence first. So that's the first one. The second one is that, we often think that leadership is somehow it's about us. Like, I'm working so hard. I've arrived. Leadership could not possibly have less to do with the leaders today. Leadership is 100% about being on to the needs of other people. And so I think I knew that theoretically, but leadership is exhausting because you have to constantly be thinking about others. So I believe leaders are sometimes leading and sometimes putting the oxygen mask on themselves. And that's great. A leader can have it be about them, but they're not leading when they do it. So leadership is actually a moment to moment commitment. And I used to think people were leaders or were not leaders. It's actually, you take the decision to lead many times throughout the day.
So my takeaway is leadership is exhausting. We're all exhausted. Francis, thank you so much for joining us. I'm so glad to hear that your family's doing okay. And really, thanks for being here.
That it was just such a pleasure. That's the fastest 10 minutes I've ever experienced.